Seated on the dais with me, Secretary in my department, Rajiv Bansal ji, Sanjeev Kumar ji, Asangba ji, Secretary General of FICCI, Shailesh Pathak ji, Remy Millard ji, Your Excellencies present here this evening, members of the Civil Aviation fraternity, and ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Wings India 2024. It indeed is a historic occasion. It indeed is a momentous occasion. It is that time on a biennial basis that we look forward to this what has become a landmark event, not only for civil aviation in India, not only for civil aviation in Asia, but it would not be an exaggeration to say probably for civil aviation on a global scale. And the import of this event is circumscribed in India's rise. India's rise as a country. India's rise as a market. India's rise as an environment which has tremendous potential and propensity to grow. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a different India. The last 9 years have seen a phenomenal change that has occurred across the length and breadth of India's economic landscape. A phenomenal change that has touched every single industry, every vertical, every horizontal, allowed the emergence of ecosystems to set foot in our country. From a domestic environment, the emergence of new companies, which hitherto probably did not exist 9 or 10 years ago. A new era of entrepreneurship, which has even touched our sector in the area of civil aviation. Across manufacturing, across services. And therefore, as we come together today as a family, and I use that word meaningfully, quote unquote family, a fraternity that is eager, a fraternity that today looks at the growth prospects from a national point of view, from an international point of view, from a regional point of view. And it is today in 2023 that civil aviation, the journey that it has undertaken over the last 9 years, has firmly established itself as a bulwark and a means of transportation within the country and a means of transportation internationally outside the country. We've all been through very, very difficult times. From an economic standpoint across the world, and from a personal standpoint for many of us. Many of us have been through a very difficult time in this COVID period. Many of us have lost those who have been extremely close to us. But as they say that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, as they say you must always have hope, and it is that hope that will drive us. It is that hope that will give us confidence. And as we talk about personal hardships, if we look at our sector was probably the worst struck from an economic perspective across the globe, across every industry. For the first time in the history of civil aviation, probably, we had planes that were permanently parked on the tarmac, that did not have a single passenger. Both airports and airlines that were bleeding profusely. But look at how miraculous the V-shaped recovery has been. Today, when we sit on the 18th of May, 2023, in this hall, in 2 years, the situation has completely turned on itself. And today we have a situation in our country where we do not have enough planes to fly the people who want to fly in our country. Never before could we imagine that situation. And in the last 9 years, if you look at the exponential growth that this sector has gone through, 2014, we had 60 million domestic passengers. 2019, pre-COVID, 144 million passengers. Doubled in a period of 6 to 7 years. 14.5% CAGR, these numbers on economic growth basis, industry growth basis, somehow seem not astounding to us. They don't seem normal, but they don't sound astounding. But on an international basis, and Remy is here sitting on the stage with me, they are indeed astounding. International traffic has grown at a 6.1% CAGR, domestic traffic at 14.5% CAGR. And that compounded annual growth rate on a decadal basis, on a 5-year basis, transforms the capacity and potential of our industry. And similar is the story when we look at cargo. In the last 15 years, cargo has grown almost 60% on a domestic basis, 50% on an international basis. And the levers that have been in place in our country to provide that, fundamentally, our economic growth rate. The fact that India is growing between 6 to 7.5% on a decadal basis. That underlying growth rate has the capability to transform lives, transform destinies of states, transform destinies of countries. If only we look at the most rapidly developed country in the world, the United States of America. What is the US of A story? The US of A story is not a 10% growth rate, is not a 9% growth rate. But the US of A's success story is that the US of A has grown at 2 to 2.5%, but has grown at that rate for the last 100 years. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of compounding. And that power of compounding, for the first time in the history of India, is being experienced in our country. It's lifting millions of people above the poverty line. It's giving opportunities to millions of youngsters that were never prevalent before. And that's why in a country that you had probably had 462 startups, you today have 84,000 startups. In a country that probably had a single unicorn, you have 116 unicorns in our country. And many of those startups are also in our space, in civil aviation. So one, economic growth. Second, rapid urbanization. India is growing from a rural economy into an urban economy. We are today at 34% of our country is urbanized. By 2030, 42% of our country will be urbanized. And that urbanization will lead to greater travel by civil aviation. The third is our level of disposable income. The fact that we have today in our country, the number of households that are earning between 5 to 10 million rupees has grown by 35% in the last 9 years. The number of households that are earning greater than 10 million has grown by almost 25% in the last 10 years. And therefore, the propensity to spend, the propensity to consume, today has reached a common man's wallet. And finally, the fact that today 1.3 billion people in our country, we, by the way, have become the most populous country in the world, even ahead of China. But that most populous tag also has another tag attached to it. We've probably become the most aspirational country in the world as well. And when you combine economic growth with urbanization, and you combine economic growth with urbanization along with higher disposable income, and combine those three factors with an aspiration, then you have a tremendous exponential market opportunity. And that is the opportunity that has presented itself for our sector in India. And therefore, when you look at our sector with that backdrop, with that environment, we need to move, and we need to move fast. Because we need to be able to satisfy, we need to be able to serve every single citizen in our country. That is the commitment of the Prime Minister of India. That is the aspiration of the government of India. And that will only be possible when we work together as a team. Because I firmly believe that in your success lies our sector's success. And in our sector's success lies India's success. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we have a massive plan in place for civil aviation. One of the first things that we looked at when I took over is that we need to change the role of government. We are not sitting on this dais as regulators. We must sit on a round table with you, not opposite you, but alongside you as facilitators in your journey. And it is with that thought and that sentiment that we are looking at a massive game plan for civil aviation. It is our impetus and our aim, a three-pronged aim. The first, we need to create capacities. The second, we need to remove all bottlenecks. There must be no bottleneck on your critical path. That's our job. And the third, simplify processes and procedures for you. And it is with that aim and that sentiment that we have put in a plan for the last 9 years and going forward. The Prime Minister is extremely clear in terms of creation of capacities. And if you look at the record of this government, from 1947 to 2013, 66 years of India's journey, in our country we built 74 airports, roughly an airport a year. In the last 9 years, from 2014 till today, we have built an additional 74 airports, heliports, and waterdromes, doubling our capacity to 148. But let me commit to you today that that is not the end. This is the beginning of our commitment. It is our commitment to take this number of 148 to over 200 over the next 3 to 4 years. And it is with that commitment in mind that this year's budget, the Finance Minister announced an additional funding plan for another 50 airports under our regional connectivity scheme called Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. So there's a fundamental concentration of creating capacity, the gateways for our passengers to be able to travel. Secretary Sahib was talking on the dais today about our metros. Today, our 6 metros in our country have a throughput capacity of 220 million passengers. In another 3 years, 3 to 4 years, this number is going to grow from 220 million to 420 million just in the 6 metro airports. Delhi today is at 70 million throughput capacity. In another 4 months, Delhi is going to go from 70 million to 109 million, becoming one of the largest airports in the world, ladies and gentlemen. We have a 98,000 crore capex plan over the next 3 years. 32,000 by Airports Authority of India, 66,000 by the private sector, 45 brownfield airports being worked on by Airports Authority of India, 3 greenfield airports being worked on by the Airports Authority of India, 7 brownfield airports being worked on by the private sector, 4 greenfield airports being worked on by the private sector. The concept of 2 airports in one city is no longer going to be an alien thought in India. Goa already has 2 airports. Delhi will soon have an airport in its neighborhood, in Jewar. A new airport is coming up in Navi Mumbai. So we are growing airport capacity in the metros. And along with that growth of airport capacity, we also have growth in our aircraft fleet. A country that in 2014 had only 700 planes, had only 400 planes. Today we have 700 planes, a growth of 75%. And that capacity is only going to expand more. Remy, who is looking around for orders today, is fully saturated. And the shoe is pinching him on the other foot. As how is he going to deliver the aircraft in the timeline that he has committed to? And therefore, the environment today as far as airport and aircraft capacity is ripe. But along with that, it is my thrust and my area of focus, that in India we must focus on last mile connectivity. Connectivity to the hinterland is mandatory and it should not be optional anymore. And there the Prime Minister's vision in coming up with a viability gap funding scheme called Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. हवाई चप्पल पहनने वाला भी हवाई जहाज में उड़े. Truly, if you look at one fundamental change that civil aviation has gone through in the last 9 years, it has been the democratization of civil aviation. Civil aviation is no longer an elitist product. Civil aviation is not meant for only a select few. Civil aviation today has become a travel system and a travel method for the masses of India. But we still have a long way to go. When we look at our growth numbers from 60 million to 144 million, those indeed are remarkable. But we've only scratched the top of the envelope. If you look at our penetration rates, out of the 144 million people who travel, there are many of us, like you and I, who are repeat travelers. True penetration is roughly 30 to 40 million, which means that you're talking about hardly 2 to 3% penetration rate in our country on a population of 1.3 billion. Which means there's 97% of our market left still unexplored. And therefore, these airports in Darbhanga, these airports in Jharsuguda, these airports in Kishangarh in Rajasthan, these airports in Rupsi in Assam, which no one could have envisioned, no one could have thought of, today are becoming part of a hub and spoke model, transporting between 50,000 to 5 lakh people on an annual basis. And so along with this regional connectivity, must always also come the last mile connectivity. And that last mile connectivity must and should be through helicopters. I was shocked to learn that in our country today, we only have 280 helicopters. Probably the lowest penetration on a global scale. And yet helicopters are the best ways of connecting many remote parts of the Northeast, our hill states of Uttarachal and Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. And therefore through Udan, which by the way has transformed the civil aviation sector. 1.2 crore people have traveled through Udan who could never dream of sitting in an airplane before. 220,000 flights have been undertaken. 473 new routes today are being plied. And within the Udan scheme, based on your feedback, your suggestions, working with you, we came up with a new small aircraft scheme. Because the fundamental issue with helicopters, the fundamental issue with small aircraft, the fundamental issue with seaplanes is that the fixed cost is very high, but the revenue potential is very low because of the number of seats. And therefore, we came up with a new model for small aircrafts where we would even fund through the VGF part of the leasing costs. And I'm glad to report that Udan 4.2 was dedicated singly and solely to small aircraft and helicopters. 186 routes were given out, 16 for seaplanes, 16 for helicopters, 50 for seaplanes, and 120 for small aircrafts. And today you have new airlines being spawned through Udan. 3 new airlines have been born in India only because of Udan. And today they are flying small planes connecting remote parts of our country. So therefore, that transition is coming about today. We are trying to use technology, trying to convert VFR routes on helicopters to IFR routes, using a new remote pilot technology, drawing in aircraft. Instead of IFR systems, we're using a system called Gagan that can remotely bring in aircraft without IFR requirements. So we're on the cusp of technological change as well. And a similar tectonic transformation and shift is coming in the area of drones. It is our commitment that India must become the drone hub of the world by 2030. And for that, on the one hand, where we have put in place a PLI scheme for manufacturing. On the other hand, the government is providing the systems in place by creation of demand through various ministries to be able to give a new fillip to the sector. The Agricultural Ministry, the Mines Ministry, the Power Ministry, the Ministry of Rural Development doing cadastral survey maps through drones. Never before in any other country in the world has the government come to the forefront to provide that demand cachet for an industry that is in its infancy. And I certainly believe that this drone industry will also transform the landscape in India. But as we grow around building capacities, airports, planes, new areas, last mile connectivity, it's also important for us to build our infrastructural capacity of being able to service this industry. And so for the first time within our ministry, Airports Authority of India has grown its capacity of ATCOs by almost 50%. In 2019, we had roughly 2,700 ATC officers. Today, we have 3,900, and we have just got an additional sanction by the finance minister for another 400 ATCOs, because we need officers to be able to man those airports. Similarly, expansion at DGCA. Our ERA, which is our regulatory authority, as more airports are being set up, more price setting in terms of services are going to be going to them to get approval. We've increased the staff at ERA, our regulatory authority, by 10. We've increased the staff at DGCA. We've taken DGCA online. There are 296 services that today are on EGCA, thereby cutting the red tape where individuals have to go to an office and everything must be done online within a prescribed time frame. So those capacities today are being put in place. We've redone policies. The MRO policy, the FTO policy needed change. It was a royalty-based system, a high rental system. We've abolished all royalties, we've brought down rentals so as to give these sectors new impetus for growth. Because I firmly believe the time has come in India not only to look at airports and airplanes. Those are the most visible things to our eye. But we need to firmly supplant the civil aviation ecosystem in India. And when I talk about ecosystem, we need to talk about MROs. We need to talk about FTOs, flying training organizations. We've grown flying training organizations from 35 to 50 in our country over the last 1.5 to 2 years. We've given the highest number of commercial pilot license in the history of India in the past fiscal year. We need to make sure our ground handling is on a firm footing. All of these ecosystem fundamentals have to be put in place. And that's one of the things that we are looking at in a very, very dedicated manner. The other thing that we have tried to do is to reduce costs for airlines. And let me give you an example of that. Value-added tax on ATF in India was at an absurd high number of 30%, which means that you had a whammy on ATF pricing, Pre-COVID, it was at 53,000 rupees a kiloliter. It's today at 1,07,000 rupees a kiloliter. And for an industry which constitutes 50% of cost structure, if that cost structure doubles out, and then you have a VAT of 30% on that input, it's a recipe for economic issues. And therefore, over the last year and a half, we looked at reducing VAT on ATF across multiple states. In July 2021, we had 12 states that charge VAT between 1 to 4%. And we had 24 states and union territories that charged VAT between 25 to 30%. Through our commitment, our arduous effort, that today has transformed itself into 31 states, ladies and gentlemen, that in India today charge a VAT of only 1 to 4%, and there are only 5 states left in India that charge a VAT of 25 to 30%. That is the transformation that we are seeing in our sector today. And therefore, with that growth potential, that institutional supplantation of forces that will assist you in that effort as you move along, that potential of growth, I firmly believe that India is well set on her way. And as our topic in Wings India 2024 says for this year, that it is going to be our journey from our Amrit Kal to our Shatabdi Kal, from 2023 to 2047. That harbinger, that message today positions India as a growth center of potential. And I firmly believe that we are set to become, from the 3rd largest domestic market, the 18th largest international market, the 7th largest domestic and international market, in this journey till 2047, to become the largest civil aviation market in the world on a domestic and international scale. The Secretary has talked about the growth of an international hub in India. It shocks me to see that we do not have an international hub in India. Our hubs are either with our neighbors on the east or our neighbors on the west. It is imperative that we create a hub in India. And for that, we must have many more international flights, both coming into our country and going out from our country, that go from point to point. And that is going to be possible today with the number of ASAs that we have signed, the number of open sky policies that we have signed with multiple countries. The fact today that the unlocking of value has taken place. An example of that is Air India, a company that under the government was bleeding 7,200 crores of common taxpayers' money, today has become a potential of growth for our country with this international historic order of 470 planes with Airbus and Boeing. That is the unlocking of value. That is the unlocking of potential. And so, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, as Henry Ford once said, if everyone moves forward together, then success takes care of itself. And so today, it's my fervent plea to you that we need to move forward together. And I'm going to end with what I started with, that in your success lies our success, and in your success lies our country's success. Thank you very much for having me, and welcome to Wings 2024.